In the early 1980s, one Japanese company came within inches of being crushed. Not by a rival, not by a market crash, but by its own inventory. A warehouse full of machines it had bet big on. Machines nobody wanted. And the name of that company? You probably hear it almost every day. Nintendo. You might assume Nintendo was born a gaming giant. It wasn't. Over more than a century, it has stood at the edge of bankruptcy more than once. And here's the strange part. It was never supposed to make video games at all. To understand how it survived, we have to go back to a deck of cards. In 1889, in Kyoto, Japan, a man named Fusajiro Yamauchi opened a small workshop. His product? Hand-painted playing cards called Hanafuda. And let's be clear about one thing from the start. This was a real registered company, and its name was already Nintendo. The cards it made often ended up on the tables of gambling parlors, but Nintendo itself was a perfectly straightforward manufacturer. Its only job was to make those cards beautiful and make them last. On the strength of that one craft, Nintendo became the largest playing card maker in all of Japan, and it coasted along comfortably for the better part of a century. In the 1950s, it even struck a deal with Disney, printing Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck onto its cards, and for a while, business boomed all over again. But here's the problem. No matter how good your cards are, they are still just cards. In any one country, only so many people are ever going to buy a deck, and Nintendo could see that ceiling coming. In 1949, a young man in his early 20s named Hiroshi Yamauchi took over the family business, becoming the company's third president. He was ambitious, and he saw the truth clearly. Stay in cards, and this company would eventually die. So he started throwing everything at the wall. He launched a taxi company, he sold instant rice, he built a vacuum cleaner, he even ran a short-stay hotel, rented by the hour. And nearly every one of those ventures failed, badly. And then, just as he was running out of road, the thing that would save the company turned up in the unlikeliest corner of the building, in the hands of a man who fixed the machines. In 1965, a young college graduate, by no measure a star student, joined Nintendo. His name was Gunpei Yokoi. His job was to maintain the machines that produced the playing cards, oiling them, repairing them. About as ordinary a job as you could have there. But Yokoi couldn't sit still, and he loved to build things. In the gaps between repairs, he'd tinker with spare parts from the factory, making little gadgets just to amuse himself. One day, almost absent-mindedly, he built an extending arm, a thing that stretched out and grabbed objects, and left it sitting on his workbench. And the company president, Yamauchi, happened to walk past and notice it. Yokoi's heart sank. He was sure he was about to be fired for fooling around on the job. Instead, Yamauchi picked up the little toy, turned it over in his hands, studied it for a long moment, and said just one thing: "Make me 1,000,000 of these before Christmas." That toy was called the Ultra Hand. It was cheap, and once it hit shelves, it sold over 1.2 million units. For the first time in nearly 80 years, a playing card company had tasted what toys could do. And Yokoi, the machine repairman, was promoted out of nowhere to run Nintendo's very first research and development department. Remember Yokoi, and remember that knack of his for turning something overlooked into something valuable. That single thread runs through every comeback Nintendo would ever make. From cards to toys to electronic toys, Nintendo inched its way forward, and its next big gamble would take place on the other side of the Pacific. In 1980, Nintendo opened an American branch and put it in the hands of Yamauchi's son-in-law, Minoru Arakawa. They had a game that had done reasonably well back in Japan, an arcade shooter called Radar Scope. Arakawa took a deep breath and placed a massive order, 3,000 machines, and shipped them across the ocean to America. It was a disaster. By the time the crates reached the United States, the buzz back in Japan had already faded. On top of that, American players found the game flat to look at, with sound effects that were shrill and grating. They simply weren't interested. Out of those 3,000 machines, only about 1,000 ever sold. The other 2,000 sat in a warehouse, untouched, the very machines we started with, heavy enough to drag the entire American operation under. Arakawa was at the end of his rope. He called his father-in-law Yamauchi and practically begged, "Send me a new game, anything, as long as we can install it inside these 2,000 dead machines and bring them back to life." And the person Yamauchi sent to the rescue wasn't some star programmer. It was a man who couldn't write a single line of code. His name was Shigeru Miyamoto. He'd been hired as an artist, someone who drew. Asking him to fix a video game sounded almost like a joke. But Miyamoto had no intention of fixing that failed game. He scrapped it entirely and set out to build something brand new. His first idea was to buy the rights to Popeye and drop that beloved American cartoon character straight into a game, but the licensing deal fell through. So he had no choice but to invent his own cast from scratch. A short little man in a cap, a young woman who gets carried off, and a giant ape who snatches her and climbs to the top of a construction site. And here's a detail almost nobody knows today. Nearly every part of that little man's look was forced on him by the technology. Back then, the screen could spare only a tiny grid for each character, 16 pixels by 16, barely anything at all. There weren't enough pixels to draw a mouth. So what did Miyamoto do? He gave the man a big nose and a bushy mustache, and let the mustache stand in for the mouth he couldn't draw. Hair was too hard to render and impossible to animate every time the character jumped, so he simply dropped a cap on his head to hide it. And those overalls? They exist because if the man's body were all one color, you wouldn't be able to see his arms as he ran. They'd blur right into his torso. So Miyamoto put him in a shirt and overalls of contrasting colors, purely so you could read the swing of his arms. In other words, that iconic outfit was never designed to look cool. It was designed to be seen. A problem the hardware made impossible to solve ended up producing one of the most recognizable characters in the history of games. When it came time to name the game, Miyamoto flipped through an English dictionary, hunting for a word that felt goofy, but a little stubborn. What he landed on was a name nobody had ever heard before: Donkey Kong. In an era when every arcade screen was wall-to-wall shooting and maze games, a game with an actual story, a damsel in distress, a hero, a rescue, was a complete oddball. Almost no one at the company believed in it. The sales manager at the American branch thought it was too weird and couldn't make sense of the name. Nearly everyone was certain the thing was dead on arrival, so they decided to test it small. In 2 bars in Seattle, they quietly set up the machine. The first day, it took in $30. A week later, the bar owners were calling them up, on their own, asking for more. Arakawa had bet right. He and his wife, with a tiny skeleton crew, pulled those 2,000 unsold machines out of the warehouse and converted them by hand, one at a time, tearing them open, rebuilding them, repainting them, and because the old cabinets were red, the very first Donkey Kong machines were red too. Their bones were literally that earlier failure, dressed up in new clothes. The 2,000 sold out fast. Orders began pouring in. By the very next year, in the United States alone, Donkey Kong had sold 60,000 machines and brought in around $180 million. 2,000 machines that nobody wanted had just become the most profitable machines in Nintendo's history. The most discarded, most despised thing can become treasure once again, and Nintendo had just lived it out. As for that little man, the one first called Jumpman, he eventually got a new name too. And where did it come from? Back in America, Nintendo rented its office from a landlord. The landlord's name was Mario. Yes, that Mario. The Mario the whole world would come to know. A landlord's name became the most famous brand in the history of video games. And here's the funny part. At this point, Mario wasn't even a plumber yet. In Donkey Kong, he was a carpenter because the game took place on a construction site. It wouldn't be until 2 years later, in another game set down among underground pipes, that he'd switch careers and become the pipe-diving, turtle-stomping plumber we all know today. There's one more twist that's almost too good. The very year after Donkey Kong took off, Nintendo finally landed the rights to Popeye and made a proper, official Popeye game. And today, almost no one remembers it. The character the whole world remembers is the stand-in, the little guy who only got drawn because Nintendo couldn't afford the real star. Mario. That rescue money gave Nintendo the confidence to launch the console that would make it a household name, the one Americans knew as the NES. And a few years later, when the entire American video game industry collapsed and everyone was saying games were finished for good, it was that console that almost single-handedly pulled the whole industry back out of the rubble. You probably know the rest of the story. Mario, Zelda, Pokemon, one after another, they became the childhoods of entire generations. The Switch went on to sell more than 150 million units, making it one of the best-selling game consoles in human history. Its successor, the Switch 2, launched in 2025 and sold close to 20 million units in its very first year, an even hotter start than the original. Even the Super Mario Bros. Movie pulled in over $1.3 billion at the global box office. Today, Nintendo is one of the most profitable and most beloved entertainment companies on the planet. But look back over all of it, and you notice something fascinating. Across more than 100 years, Nintendo never won by being the richest, the strongest, or the most technologically advanced. If anything, the opposite. Remember Gunpei Yokoi, the man who fixed the machines? Later in his career, he gave his whole way of working an actual name. He called it lateral thinking with withered technology. It sounds abstract, but the idea is dead simple. Don't chase the newest, priciest, flashiest technology. Instead, take the stuff that's already mature, cheap, even written off as obsolete, and find a fresh angle that makes it new and fun again. That single idea explains almost every miracle in Nintendo's history. A toy arm, knocked together in a workshop, saved a playing card company. 2,000 failed machines became a money printer. And in 1989, when competitors were racing to cram color screens into their handhelds, Yokoi did the opposite. He gave the Game Boy a screen that was black and white, but cheap, long-lasting, and nearly indestructible. And that inferior little screen went on to crush rivals whose displays were prettier, but pricier and power-hungry. In the end, what made Nintendo great wasn't luck. It was a way of seeing. Most of us, when we hit a wall, reach for better resources first. Newer tech, more money, smarter people. But Nintendo's story keeps pointing at something else. The real turning point is rarely hiding inside something better. More often, it's sitting right next to you, inside the things everyone else has dismissed, given up on, or thrown away. A failed product, an outdated tool, a limitation you can get around, a person no one is betting on. Look at that pile of scrap from a different angle, and it might just be the one treasure no competitor can take from you. So the next time you feel boxed in by something that looks like a dead end, too old, too cheap, broken, or written off by everyone around you, maybe the real question, ISN, where do I find something better? Maybe it's, what's in this scrap that I haven't seen yet? That, perhaps, is the real secret behind Nintendo's endless ability to come back from the dead.